If your army does not include units with the Black Templars, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Deathwatch, or Space Wolf keywords, you are getting an upgraded version of Oath of Moment. This is designed to even the playing field between players who want to use Codex Space Marines, as opposed to those who have their own unique Codex supplement to draw upon. But there are ways for the Deathwatch to get the updated Oath of Moment. Is it potentially worth taking generic Space Marine units? You could have them painted black, but there would be no Deathwatch keywords. I'm kidding, kill teams are awesome. This video will explain the Space Marine changes in the balance patch from the point of view of a Deathwatch player. There are rules updates, unit updates, detachment updates, including the new detachment for your Psychic Witches. The audio didn't seem to pick up the W. It was a W. The whole Space Marine update is a big W. More power than Battle Sisters, more improvements than Battle Sisters, cheaper units than Battle Sisters like the Assault Marines and the Devastator Marines compared to Seraphim and Retributors. Totally fair! An update we have that is worth exploring, as there are now 4 different ways to play Deathwatch in 40k 10th edition, and you get different bonuses depending on which way you go. To understand the different ways, you need to understand the way Space Marine detachments work with Space Marine chapters. I don't want to tell you how it is, I want you to understand how it works so that when a situation comes up, you're able to figure out why it does or does not work, what benefits you get, and the comment section should just take care of itself. Balance updates are confusing times, especially if you haven't played 40k for, well, at least as long as this channel has existed. How detachments work for Space Marines is a weird rule. The Adeptus Astartes are spread over many codexes and indexes, but they are valid for any Space Marine chapter, with some restrictions. Say you have your Ultramarines Tactical Squad. Good unit. Very basic chapter. We've all heard of the Ultramarines. The Ultramarines are the most Space Marine of the Space Marines. It is in the name. The Tactical Squad can use any detachment in the Space Marine Codex, like the Gladius Task Force styled after the Ultramarines, or any other detachments, like the Firestorm Assault Force with its 12-inch range of +1 strength. The Ultramarine Tactical Squad can use the detachments in the Blood Angels Codex, which is good for Marines with jump packs. Or they can use the Dark Angels Codex supplements. If your army is Adeptus Astartes, you can use the Unforgiven Task Force that's in that Dark Angels Codex. Because you see, this Ultramarine coloured Tactical Marine is not an Ultramarine for the purposes of rules. You don't pick and add a chapter keyword like in 8th or 9th edition. If there is an extra keyword, that is an important chapter word, an actual rule. The colour you paint them doesn't matter. If you have Adeptus Astartes, you are a Space Marine for rules terms. This means that Grey Knights are not Space Marines on the tabletop. They are not Adeptus Astartes. Kill Team Cassius is not a Space Marine, as their most recent update was in Imperial Agents. They don't have the Adeptus Astartes keyword. Lieutenant Titus is an Ultramarine and has to be an Ultramarine because he has the Ultramarine keyword. The Tactical Squad is a common unit to a lot of chapters. Titus is an Ultramarine only. You could add Titus to your army, but that would make it a Ultramarine keyword army. You could paint the model yellow, add him to Yellow Marines and call him Sergeant Lysander who gives sustained hits. Shout out to the 3rd edition Space Marine players. But then you can't include any Imperial Fist keyword units because you are not allowed to mix chapter keywords. That is a rule in the Space Marine Codex. If you had a totally new made-up chapter like the Shards of Orpheus, no, the Feathers of Orpheus, Ultramarine Gene Seed, Grey Armor, they like stealth. Original chapter, do not steal. They like the Vanguard detachment in the Space Marine Codex. Okay, good. They have a chapter master who uses the data card for Shrike. But this is not Shrike, this is John Raven. The Feathers of Orpheus are now playing with the Raven Guard keyword as their chapter keyword for rules on the table. So that army can't be in the Dark Angels Unforgiven Task Force because the restrictions on that detachment prevent units with the Adeptus Astartes chapter that aren't Dark Angels. If the army of the Feathers of Orpheus didn't include John Raven in the coming battle, they could use the Unforgiven Task Force. The Tactical Squad doesn't have the Raven Guard or Feathers of Orpheus keyword on their unit. plain old Adeptus Astartes. Some detachments have more restrictions than only one chapter, or only this one particular chapter, or no chapter keyword. The Tactical Squad is excluded from the Space Wolf Index and the Deathwatch Index. So if I wanted Righteous Crusaders, the Feathers of Orpheus would have to select units compatible with the Righteous Crusaders detachment. I think it's easier to think of it as the Righteous Crusaders detachment and not as the Black Templars detachment or Black Templar rules. The Black Templars don't like Psykers. In the Righteous Crusaders detachment, no Adeptus Astartes Psyker models are allowed. So you can include allied Inquisitors who have the Psyker keyword. Imperial agents can be allied into any Imperium faction. The assigned agents rule explains the limits of how many units based on the game size. Now we're going to start to get more stupid. The Black Templars hate Psykers, but this is why I want you to think of it as detachments. This isn't the Black Templars or even the Black Templars keyword units can't be used in the same army as Space Marine Psykers. Just that in the Righteous Crusaders detachment, you can't use Space Marine Psykers. You can have the Gladius Task Force, which has no such restrictions, and add a Space Marine Librarian to a tactical squad. In the same army as them could be the Chapter Master of the Black Templars, and he wouldn't care. You can even use Black Templar units in the new all-psychic Space Marine detachment, the Librarius Conclave. This is allowed in the rules, just not the law. We will get to that Librarius detachment much later in the video. You can't mix chapter keywords in any detachment. So the Black Templars in the Gladius Task Force could not use Lieutenant Titus or Deathwatch units from the Deathwatch Index, such as the Talon Strike Kill Team. They have the Deathwatch keyword on their unit card. However, I could have the Black Templars in the Gladius Task Force with Deathwatch if those Deathwatch units came from the Imperial Agents Codex. The agents of the Imperium Deathwatch units are not removed from the game or patched over with the arrival of the new Deathwatch Index. You could have a Deathwatch Kill Team. It has the Deathwatch keyword in the keyword section, but it is not a chapter keyword on the faction part where it matters. Compare the agents version to the Deathwatch Index and you can see what I mean. The word being there in the faction keywords is what defines it as a chapter keyword or not. On the Agents Index card, Deathwatch is not a chapter keyword any more than Imperium or Infantry are the name of chapters. With this knowledge, we can explore the 4 ways to play Deathwatch and figure out if we can get that better Oath of Moment or not. So way number 1 is as generic Space Marines. We have black armor, we have the shoulder pads, but no units with the Deathwatch faction keyword like the Indomitor Kill Team. I can have tactical squads. The Gladius Task Force has no restrictions on which units you can take, and it is a good detachment choice for Deathwatch. They all get the better version of Oath of Moment, and you can include agents of the Imperium Deathwatch units, like the Proteus Kill Team. It won't get the better Oath of Moment because it is not Adeptus Astartes and does not have the Oath of Moment faction rule. Played like this, the Deathwatch army can go in any Space Marine detachment or the Space Wolves or Black Templar Index as long as you follow the unit restrictions like no tactical squads for the Space Wolves. This way you are playing Deathwatch but not really playing Deathwatch because we don't have the Deathwatch or any chapter keyword, and so you could add Lieutenant Titus. The army is now an Ultramarines army for rules purposes, but this is the only way of getting Titus in a Deathwatch army like at the start of Space Marine 2. The second way to play Deathwatch is to use Deathwatch keyword units like the Talon Strike Kill Team and the Fortis Kill Team from the Deathwatch Index in a Codex Space Marine detachment. You can use the Space Marine Codex detachments like the Gladius Task Force. You can't use the Blood Angels detachments and other divergent chapters because of a restriction on which chapter can use those detachments. Blood Angels is Blood Angels or no keyword chapter allowed. We don't get the better Oath of Moment as we are using Deathwatch keyword units. You can take agents of the Imperium Deathwatch units like the Proteus Kill Team in an Agents of the Imperium Blackstar. You could have an Agents of the Imperium Fortis Kill Team and a Deathwatch Index Fortis Kill Team. You could. There's no real reason to. The Index Fortis Kill Team is better and will work better and be affected by stratagems and the detachment rule. But you could. The third way to play Deathwatch is in the Black Spear Task Force. Then these restrictions apply. So no one from other chapters, so no Dark Angels, no Ultramarines. It's units that don't have a chapter keyword or Deathwatch only. You're not allowed to have Agents of the Imperium units, except for Chaplain Cassius. And I have a video including what his team can do well in this detachment, despite being an Agents of the Imperium unit, not Adeptus Astartes. So we follow the restrictions, no tactical squads, no scout squads. You can have other Codex Space Marine units with no chapter keywords, but they don't have the mission tactics rule. So an Outrider bike squad would not benefit from the detachment rule. You need to have mission tactics on your unit card. This detachment wants you to go heavy on the kill teams. This is the way I expect most Deathwatch players will play the Deathwatch. We get Oath of Moment, that is on our unit cards, but it is the basic Oath of Moment because we dared to include Deathwatch units. Technically, you could have no kill teams or Deathwatch units in this detachment. You would get the better version of Oath of Moment, but this is a stupid idea because none of your units would be able to use the detachment rule or the special ammunition which requires the kill team keyword. You would be better off with a Codex Space Marine Detachment, see version 1 of how to play Deathwatch. Some units could get the benefit of the special ammunition. They would be kill teams from the Agents of the Imperium Codex. And that is really the fourth way to play. You play Deathwatch using the Imperial Agents Codex. You use the datasheets there, not the ones from the Deathwatch Index. As none of our units are Adeptus Astartes, there is no Oath of Moment at all. You use the Agents of the Imperium detachments, not the Space Marine detachments, so you can use the Assassin detachment, which I've covered. The Imperialis Fleet detachment works well. The Ordo Xenos Alien Hunters detachment is like the Black Spear Task Force, but for the Agents version of Deathwatch. You can use any of the units from the Agents of the Imperium Codex or the Agents of the Imperium Legends document. This is your codex. You are not capped by the assigned agents rule. This is still a valid way to play Deathwatch. The recent released index is not a replacement for this codex. Unless you really wanted the Proteus kill team and kill team Cassius there, and they had access to all the stratagems, or you love having lots of Navy grunts completing missions while your kill teams get to killing the enemy, very few people will play this way, but you still can. That gives us the 4 ways to play Deathwatch. Generic Space Marines painted black, having some Deathwatch keyword units in any Space Marine Codex detachment. This is my favourite way because you can change detachment every week if you wanted. Version 3 is Deathwatch with the limits and benefits of the Black Spear Task Force, and the 4th way is to not be Adeptus Astartes Space Marines and play the Imperial Agents version of the Deathwatch in the Imperial Agents Codex. These 4 ways to play Deathwatch are all valid in all of the ways to play 40k like Crusade, tournaments, or everyday normal games. Whether you call that open play or casual match play is entirely up to you. Normal games. So what's this new Oath of Moment even do? Why is it better? Is it worth getting compared to having kill teams? Oath of Moment lets you reroll all hit rolls against one target. Every unit in your army rerolls hit rolls against that target. If you don't have Deathwatch, you also get to add 1 to wound rolls against that target. I like that it is +1 to wound, so it will stack with things like Twin Linked, which allows you to reroll all the wound rolls. And it is basic balance of the Space Marine Codex against all of the cool and better versions that the Divergent chapters can get. We're going to see when we start comparing kill teams to regular Space Marines. Ultramarines as a keyword is not called out in this list, so Ultramarines will get +1 to wound. All of the Ultramarine characters are going to love this. We're going to see a lot more Ultramarine armies on the table. Yeah, there's Lieutenant Titus. There is also the Primarch Rabute Gilliman. One of his abilities lets you have an additional Oath of Moment target if you killed the first one. An Oath of Moment lasts until your next command phase. The Firestorm Assault Force really likes this change. Your units get +1 strength when they're shooting at enemies within 12 inches. Often that can mean +1 to wound compared to the basic strength of your weapon. Having actual +1 to wound is great. You can only have one set of +1 to wound. Increasing your strength is not +1 to wound. It's just like you were wounding on a 4+, now you're on a 3+. These can stack together, so if you're firing what was a strength 4 weapon against a toughness 4 opponent, well, it's now a strength 5 weapon with +1 to wound. So you've gone from overall wounding on a 4+ to wounding on a 2+. Higher strength is 3+, and then the +1 to wound means 2+. The Anvil Siege Force is shown to be not as important, as the +1 to wound from being stationary with heavy weapons is now just handed out, and can be handed out a second time by the Primarch. But the Anvil bonus is there for one Space Marine unit that will love the +1 to wound without the Oath of Moment, and there are some improved units that will like that. The First Company Task Force is not better. There's even less reason to take it when the bonuses to wound are every turn from Oath of Moment, not just one special time in the game, and Sternguard veterans have even less reason to be here. With the bonuses to wound, it's not just against infantry you're getting the good bonuses. You don't need anti-monster 5+ special ammunition. If you select the monster as your Oath of Moment target and you have that +1 to wound, then all weapons will be wounding on at least a 5+. It's like 9th edition when bolt guns wounded tanks on a 5+, because strength 4 compared to toughness 7, as was the standard for tanks. Thankfully, this change is not across the board, but it means that las cannons will be wounding on a 2+. Any monsters and vehicles you focus down will die much quicker. In the Black Spear Task Force, we can have an extra Oath of Moment of our own with the Tome of Ectoclades. It can go on a generic captain, and would be the boosted +1 to wound version if we had no Deathwatch units. But that would mean no Deathwatch kill teams, meaning you have no real detachment rule outside of using the adaptive tactic stratagem to get it on one adept as a Astartes unit, and half of the stratagems would do nothing. Taking even one Deathwatch unit drops you down to the worst version of Oath of Moment. With Guilliman and the better Oath of Moment, Ultramarines are looking to be in a very powerful position among the chapters. So are Deathwatch, and other chapters got a little boost to their named characters to increase the OC of certain units. They don't have to join the unit, those units in the army get better. But that's non-Deathwatch characters. The non-Deathwatch units that we can take have gotten a lot better. Intercessors are looking nice, not better than the Fortis kill team, but their bolt guns get 2 more attacks as a new bonus ability as long as you focus fire and all shoot at the same target. I like that. Intercessors being better is good. I think they're worth taking for the sticky objectives. The heavy keyword on their guns is also very useful for the Anvil Siege Force, and the points for them are unchanged. They're a good little utility unit. You don't take them for the barrage of bolter fire, just to complete missions. For the barrage of bolter fire, you choose the improved Sternguard. The Sternguard are a good competitor to the Fortis kill team and at the same points cost, or they're a great choice for using pure Codex Space Marine units. 100 points for 5 is an option which the Fortis kill team can't do. It is always 200 points, and that's for 10 models. The Sternguard now reroll all wound rolls instead of rerolling wound rolls of 1 when targeting the Oath of Moment target. That ability works in any detachment, including the Black Spear Task Force, and it doesn't require the better version of Oath of Moment, it just stacks really well with it. Reroll to wounds and +1 to wound means more wounds overall. The Sternguard don't have mission tactics, but their weapons have devastating wounds, good devastating wounds. When you're rerolling wound rolls, reroll all of the non-6s. I prefer the regular bolters for lots of shots instead of the combi weapons. 2 shots or 3 shots if in rapid fire range, and you're hitting on a 3+, not a 4+, even though against the Oath of Moment target you are rerolling all hits. If I want a pure gun unit, I will take 10 Fortis Marines. You have a higher range of weapons, you can have the missiles, you can have flamers, you can have plasma weapons. Their bolt guns have higher strength and AP with lethal hits, instead of devastating wounds that the Sternguard have. For a combat unit, I am still picking Deathwatch veterans, but if I want a smaller gun unit that can shoot long range and complete missions, perhaps the Sternguard. They look nice. I'm just struggling to see how they're better than the Fortis kill team. It's a shame that they can't use special ammunition as they are not a kill team. For many editions, they were the unit that had the special ammunition. Anything for tactical marines? No, just using the bolter marines as Sternguard or intercessors. Okay. Or they are a cheap 140 point unit that splits into 2 essentially 70 point units, very good at holding objectives and completing missions. The Inceptors are 10 points cheaper because their 3-inch deep strike is now a 6-inch deep strike, which means you can't land on an objective with enemies on the other side and kill them so that you now control the objective. Without that ability to take objectives, I think these models are better in a Talon Strike kill team. Then if you want to teleport units around, we have the Black Spear Task Force teleportation stratagem, and there's the Beacon Angelus if you want to drop in on the enemy turn with a free rapid ingress. Any unit with a character with that enhancement gets the Deep Strike rule. Infernus Marines with their big heavy flamers, I want them out of the Fortress Kill team. If you have like a full unit's worth of Infernus Marines, if you have the one guy, yeah, stick him in the Fortress Kill team. They have extra armor penetration on their flamers, which the Fortress Flamers do not have, nor do the Black Templars version. When they shoot and cause battle shock, that test is now taken at -1. We're seeing a lot more of that, -1 to tests all going around. I like having them separate because then you have a dedicated Overwatch unit. Overwatch is very strong because with turret weapons, it's basically an extra round of shooting. Having them in the middle of the board is scary. Opponents will not want to come closer to you, especially light infantry, and now with AP -1, heavier infantry. The heavy bolt rifles on the heavy intercessors went up to 2 damage, and on the Gravis Captain that's up to damage 3. The heavy intercessors' heavy bolters now hit on a 3+, but is still damage 2. They are 220 points for 10. The Indomitor Kill team is better. Our weapons are better, but the heavy intercessors have gotten a bit closer to how we are. Our bolt guns have lethal hits. Our heavy bolter is damage 3. I wouldn't worry about the heavy intercessors, although when I see them across the table from me, I'm like, oh good, I wonder how I'm going to shift that brick. If you had the models in your collection, you were probably going for the smallest number of heavy intercessor style models in the Indomitor Kill team. And points after the change, it's 310 points worth of models for 270 points in the Indomitor Kill team. We can't do as many things as separate units, like complete multiple actions, but they are more powerful together. Collectively, they benefit from characters and stratagems and enhancements, and you have ablative bodies to keep your Eradicator models alive with their melter weapons. I know heavy intercessors are very powerful with damage 2 and the toughness and wounds to hold objectives, but I still prefer regular intercessors to sticky objectives. If you can break down the foe and outlast their reserves, you will hold the objectives long after the intercessors have died or moved on. To destroy enemy vehicles, we have a Predator Annihilator getting an update so that it rerolls all damage rolls against vehicles and monsters instead of rerolling damage rolls of 1. It's a useful tank to have if you struggle with the big things. The Deathwatch are okay at fighting monsters and vehicles. Lots of our weapons have lethal hits and okay armor penetration to go with it. See the Fortress Kill Team Bolters. Or rather, we have the Indomitor Kill teams, which are great at anti-large with those melter weapons. And we have Deathwatch veterans with Strength 10 devastating wound hammers. We have Oath of Moment back to target those monsters, and we can have army-wide lethal hits. The Space Marine Outriders are improved. There are no bikes in kill teams, in any of the kill teams in the Deathwatch Index version 2, The Reckoning, so Outriders are useful for the speed to get to objectives and complete actions. They're a little bit slower as they can no longer guarantee a 6-inch advance as they've lost their turbo boost rule. To get onto objectives, control them, fight for them, Infiltrators are similar points, or Scouts outside of the Black Spear Task Force. But Outriders get bonuses to strength and damage on the charge. I think that the White Scars and the Blood Angels will be most happy with this change. In Index version 1, I often took the Deathwatch Bikers. Deathwatch Bikers did not return for Index 2 Revolution. Outriders are a good replacement. I could use the Agents Legends version, but they are not allowed in the Black Spear Task Force, and they wouldn't have Oath of Moment or Stratagem or Rules bonuses in other detachments. Outriders would. The small units in the Space Marine Army got a little bit better at the stabbing part. Lieutenants in Phobos armor, in Cursor Squad, Reavers, Scouts, the Lieutenant with combi weapons and more get an extra armor penetration on their combat knives. This isn't all close combat weapons, just combat knives. It matches the Spectra's kill team. The Lieutenant with combi weapon running around on their own is a very good character and looks so very Deathwatch. They could represent a kill marine from the lore, a lone Deathwatch assassin. How could you not? Their knife was very disappointing at AP 0. And I was sad when it lost the anti-Tyranid 4+ rule from the Index going to the Codex. Little bit of AP should help. The Reavers are updated. From their fearsome assault, enemies must subtract 1 to battle shock test that they take, but the Reaver Lieutenant is apparently not as scary. I would have Reavers with a Phobos Lieutenant, and then the whole unit has Deep Strike. The Lieutenant and their unit can move after shooting, and from the rules as they are, That doesn't prevent a charge. Essentially a 3d6 charge from deep strike as long as you shoot someone somewhere with at least one bolt pistol or any weapon. When you get into combat, you don't need to kill the enemy units. You target an objective with enemies that are OC1 and you charge them. The survivors will be objective control 0 when near those reavers. The Terror Troop rule as it was is basically now inside the Fearsome Assault rule. They have a new rule to reduce objective control. Reavers are a good cheap utility unit to drop in and complete actions. I can't say that Reavers are back because Reavers have never been here in the first place to make a comeback. The changes for Deathwatch specific units are pretty minor. I've only just caught up on the last balance patch, which said no double surge moves, and I'm now seeing that that's just any kind of out of phase move, not something that has surge in the name like Blood Surge and Brood Surge. If you had a Lieutenant in Phobos armor and the Spectre's kill team had the Instigator bolt rifle, you couldn't move 6 inches after shooting from the rifle and then move an extra d6 with the Lieutenant. It's only one move you get, so that unit should have a Phobos Librarian instead, if you want a character at all. The rules about special ammunition only being bolt weapons are gone. Technically this applied to Index version 2 Resistance for 1.5 days, as it all had the same names as Index version 1. There are no changes for the Deathwatch specifically in the dataslate. Any mention of bolters only is in the wind. We just got a new index. It would be weird if there were additional changes a few hours later. There are no point changes to the Deathwatch. It's all the same as it was just released in the index. It's surprisingly cheap. The Space Marine points changes make Deathwatch look good by comparison, and I still encourage you to have kill teams over regular Space Marine units unless you really want the special ability that you find on a Space Marine unit, like the Infiltrators and their ability to stop reserves within 12 inches. The Armor of Contempt stratagem has changed in all Space Marine detachments in the Black Spear Task Force and in the Agents of the Imperium Ordo Xenos Alien Hunters Detachment. It only works against one enemy unit, it doesn't last for the phase. It still has value against a powerful attack, but you suffer more against concentrated attacks. It may not be worth using this stratagem on tanks, because they often get focused down by multiple units, especially if the enemy is able to throw Oath of Moment onto it. In the Gladius Task Force, there's a change to the Fire Discipline enhancement. It no longer gives you critical hits on a 5+ when you're in the Devastator Doctrine. Instead, in the Devastator Doctrine, you can re-roll advance rolls, and the Devastator Doctrine lets you advance and still shoot. Critical hits on a 5+, as you are getting sustained hits from the enhancement, and usually lethal hits from a Lieutenant or Apothecary Biologus, that was a lot. If you see the change and think, well, the Gladius Task Force is dead, no reason to have the detachment anymore, I think not. I think there is so much here, like army-wide advance and charge, army-wide fall back and charge. It is like 3 of the other detachments in one, but each turn, you get to pick which one it is. The enhancement is still 40 points, so what you do is, don't take the enhancement anymore. I think it's unfortunate that the Deathwatch didn't get more rules changes, because we needed some FAQ. There are no fixes to errors on the recently released datasheets. Fortis Kill Team Chainswords are still hitting on a 4+. And there is no FAQ on the Kill Team rule. The Kill Team rule says when you have units with mixed toughness, like the Talon Strike Kill Team, you use the toughness of the majority of the models. And if there's a tie, you use the highest. There are 2 rules in the core rulebook about toughness. One is saying, oh, you use the highest one if there's a choice. We know that that's overruled. The other one is to say leaders use the toughness of their bodyguard, rather than their own toughness, when they're being targeted by, like, precision. So there is some discussion on whether you count characters as being like part of an 11-man unit, or if it's a 10-man unit, you figure out the toughness based on the kill team, and then you add the character copying that toughness. I think that since both of the rules, the one about the highest toughness is the one you use, and the leader rule are both in the core rulebook, I think this kill team rule overrides both. So a Talon Strike kill team with 5 Assault Intercessor bodies and 5 Inceptor bodies with a captain with a jump pack, that would be 6 models of toughness 4, 5 models of toughness 6, so you would use the majority toughness 4. An FAQ to clarify would be great, but that's how we've been playing it. That kill team rule should be a faction rule on all of the datasheets. Then we know it applies all of the time. Mission tactics should be a unit ability. As a faction rule, It is always on regardless of detachment, like Oath of Moment. Oath of Moment isn't repeated in the Dark Angels Codex, but all of the units use Oath of Moment regardless of detachment or where that rule is. Don't play it like Mission Tactics is always on if you were in something like the Gladius Task Force. Rules as intended seems to be it is just in the Black Spear Task Force that Mission Tactics are on. The Kill Team rule should be the faction rule and should be on all the time. There is no fix on what has probably just been spotted as an issue. In the version 2 of how to play Deathwatch, you're in the Space Marine Codex, you're using one of their detachments like the Gladius Task Force, you can take agents of the Imperium units. You can take the agents of the Imperium Blackstar. Its capacity is 12 Deathwatch keyword infantry models. So I can transport an agent of the Imperium Indomitor kill team in the Blackstar. That is the intention. But hey, Deathwatch index units also have the Deathwatch keyword. And more of them fit in the agents of the Imperium Blackstar than in the index Deathwatch Blackstar. So that's an exploit. And with the keywords being in 2 places, it brings into question what the intention is for Oath of Moment. In version 1 of running Deathwatch, generic Space Marine units, I said you could have allied agents Deathwatch and keep the better Oath of Moment rule. Strictly, the rule on Oath of Moment update is any Deathwatch keyword. So adding a Proteus kill team as agents allies would stop your army from getting the better version of Oath of Moment, and I don't think that's the intention, but I don't know if that's the intention. We know Deathwatch allies doesn't affect which detachment you can join. The Dark Angels Codex clarifies what a faction chapter is. Agents of the Imperium Deathwatch do not have Deathwatch as a faction chapter word. It depends when the Codex or Index was written, when the wording may be different. It doesn't make sense to me that you could ally agents of the Imperium Deathwatch to generic Space Marines, but couldn't if the army contained one Blood Angels keyword unit. You probably wouldn't want to have agents of the Imperium Deathwatch. They are generally a worse version of the Index Deathwatch units, apart from the Proteus kill team, which is absent from the Index. It is a problem with Games Workshop's U-turn on Deathwatch. First we were Space Marines, then we were Imperial Agents. Now we're back to Space Marines while also being Imperial Agents. I'm not saying it's bad to get an index back, just now we have a clone of us going around. But 40k is not a computer game. If bugs like this pop up in a video game, they can be patched without people noticing, and the patch affects everyone once they start the game and the update is downloaded. That doesn't happen on a real tabletop game with paper rules. If there is a rules update and you miss it, you will be playing with one version of the rules as written when another version should be in its place. And now everyone is playing a different version of 40k 10th edition, Felinids and Space Wolves living together, mass hysteria. And Games Workshop will do more changes. Hopefully the update in 3 months or so will fix things like the stuff I've just mentioned. But fixes seem to take 6 months or more. Or forever if it's trying to resolve the chainswords on the Fortis kill team, which we've had since the very start of 10th edition. Who wants more updates? Casual players don't seem to. You get a game in once a month, maybe more, probably less. Competitive players I talk to don't want more changes. If the rules change, you need to try and get more practice games in before the rapidly approaching tournament. And if there is a new rules update, you need to hold off to find out if the upcoming tournament will use the updates or stick with list submissions from before the update. And if it uses the update, you desperately try and get some games in with your now revised army. On the big tournament scene, they make their own rules patch to cover errors and make rulings on what is their interpretation of rules as intended, or if they will go with rules as written. But Games Workshop thinks more changes are better. Their way of implementing them feels too much like generate hype, move quickly, update stuff, break stuff, fix it much later if it is still a problem. If they do update things, it is overdone, hence the Sisters of Battle. And the new Necron Starshatter Arsenal detachment feels like destroyers with guns were left out until now, only to also be added to the Annihilation Legion detachment. So there are still problems to fix, but more fixes are coming. The Imperial agents are suffering. For their points, there is no change. As an ally, the Vindicare Assassin is 25 points cheaper. That's a good thing, but it's still a big ask at 125 points. While the Imperial Guard's Chimera went up in points, the Imperial Agent's Chimera did not. The Imperial Knights Warglaves are cheaper, so they're a more attractive choice as allies compared to anything in the Agents of the Imperium Codex. For Adeptus Sororitas, Warglaves are now cheaper than a Castigator and an Exorcist. They will be a go-to for players. There is still no Agents of the Imperium army rule besides some of the units being cheaper when you play them entirely in the Agents of the Imperium Codex. But none of those units are Deathwatch, so we're not really saving any points. There are no changes to any Legends units for Kill Team Cassius or any others. And the Ordo Xenos Alien Hunters Detachment has a worse version of Armor of Contempt compared to a week ago. So Deathwatch players will probably not be playing the Agents of the Imperium version. We do have a new Space Marine Codex detachment as part of the December Grotmus calendar. A Psychic detachment. Do you like mission tactics but think it has too few parts? 3 battle rounds only? Try 5 upgrades for 5 battle rounds. At the start of each battle round you get a bonus. Divination, Pyromancy and Telekinesis all fighting to be the one you use in battle round 2. These are good adaptable tactics, but these will only apply to Psyker units. But that's okay. I've already suggested adding Librarians to your Fortis kill team and a Phobos Librarian to your Spectrus kill team. You can add a Terminator Librarian to your Terminators. And if you attach an allied Psychic Inquisitor to your Veteran kill team, well, you share keywords. Now you are Adeptus Astartes and Psyker. Cheeky. The Inquisitors can only join battle line units, so it's limited to the Veteran kill team. You need Psykers in the unit to make the detachment rule work, but not every unit needs the Psyker keyword to benefit. The stratagems are based on Psykers, but have a range, like a casting range. For damage, there is the Iron Arm stratagem. One unit within 18 inches gets +1 strength or +2 if the Biomancy discipline was chosen to be active for the army that round. Our main Deathwatch combat unit are the Veterans. Strength 11 or Strength 12 hammers can be enough to get +1 to wound against the big vehicles, and Strength 6 power swords will wound on a 2+ against the light infantry toughness 3 creatures. And Orcs and Votan and Necron Immortals will now be wounded on a 3+. The Fusillade enhancement is good on a Librarian with a unit of Sternguard. Give them the Bolters. They become anti-monster, anti-vehicle 5+, and unlike Deathwatch special ammunition, it can be used on weapons which have devastating wounds. 30 shots on an Oath of Moment target, rerolling all hits, rerolling all wounds, because of the Sternguard rule, to get those 5s. And you get sustained hits when in the Pyromancy discipline. This is enough to kill a Leman Russ, if not a Rogel Dawn. With bolt guns. And it's not a real Psychic detachment without shenanigans. Combat armies get hit by Sensory Assault for -2 move and -2 charge. Enemy Terminators are now sad, but you can only target them if they're on the board. Use Fiery Shield in the Pyromancy discipline against a combat horde. They are going to be -1 to hit, and their weapons are now hazardous. You cannot choose not to attack in the fight phase, so they will take losses from hazardous. And this can stack with Armor of Contempt, but horde attacks are often lots of attacks with average weapon skill and no armor penetration. If your army is kill team heavy, mission tactics will serve you better. Stratagems like Prescient Precision gives you lethal hits, but we have adaptive tactics for that, and it can work on 2 kill teams until the start of your next command phase. If you have more general Space Marine units, the Gladius Task Force will probably have the choices you need. A lot of this detachment feels like the Gladius Task Force, but only for Psykers. The Prescience enhancement is a D6 reactive move for a Psyker unit, or in the Gladius Task Force, a D6 reactive move. Celerity lets you advance and charge, which you can do in the Gladius Task Force. For the points you are paying, you are upping a Librarian's cost to be closer to a Watchmaster. And in any detachment, and all of the time, he has advance and charge and fall back and charge, as well as advance and shoot and fall back and shoot. And who gets to have 5 full battle rounds and has a cohesive army left near the end to actually plan things? It's a nice detachment to try, but I still suggest the Black Spear Task Force for most Deathwatch players. I've explained the Black Spear Task Force and all of the units that come in the Deathwatch Index in this next video. My darlings and viewers, have a great day with your updated Space Marines in 40k.